Hi there, my name is Josh Ato. I work at Google in the Strategic Insights team. Our role is to support our advertising customers and agency partners with new data points to give a sense of what's happening now and ultimately how to plan for the future. At Google, we're obviously a destination where billions of people turn to for answers. But where do we go for answers? Admittedly, my team has a smaller scale to servicing billions of people, but still, many look to us for new insights or points of view. Something that I'm sure many of us have found is quite challenging during a pandemic, where the only way to connect with colleagues or anyone outside your household is via a screen and camera, as this event highlights. Same with everyone, we've been on a roller coaster over the last 12 months, adjusting to life, working and researching from home. Today, I'm going to briefly share with you a couple of examples of our work over the last 12 months, as we've aimed to understand any shifts in consumer behaviour. I'll also talk through what we've learned this year in our approach to research and ultimately the longevity of our behaviours as researchers and data professionals through this time. Firstly, most, if not all, of our projects start with a search. A Google search, that is. And not just a bit of light desk research using Google, that I'm sure we all do to kind of quickly find materials on any given topic. But search as a data set, as a powerful tool to explore and sharpen our thinking and our hypotheses. What I'm talking about here is tools such as google.com/trends. If you've never played with this tool, you're very much missing out. We actually don't have much internally that's dramatically different from this tool. And it's invaluable to us for all our projects. Search as a behavioral data set allows us to quickly test hypotheses. And this large, anonymous and aggregated data allows us, for the most part, to see what's really going on in people's lives in ways that the same data from surveys, for example, might misguide us as people second guess what they almost want us to see, not what's really happening. Both long-term and short-term trends can be analysed in as an unbiased data set as possible. In fact, if we were designing a long-term data set to help us understand what's changing to consumer behaviour, or at least digital consumer behaviour, before, during and after a pandemic, I don't think we could do much better than what we have in our search trends. However, while this data is incredibly useful, it's only ever one piece of the puzzle. It's very clear to see what is happening using search data, but less so to see why and how it might change in the future. The examples I'm going to share will show how we balance this analysis with qualitative research that fills that gap. One of the most interesting long-term trends for retail in the UK is about searches that use the words best versus cheap. Those two very simple words demonstrate how we search and shop for products online. And since 2009, there's been a very interesting pattern on our usage of those two words. Searches that include the word cheap have declined, while searches that use best have grown steadily, plotting a very visually appealing X-shaped chart as they switched in popularity. This is what initially piqued our curiosity, because while interesting in and of itself, it made us think that we really didn't know what was going on here. And in reality, we didn't really have anything close to a really solid understanding of how people really shopped online in a world with access to an amazing range of information all around us. Ultimately, this led us to a project called Decoding Decisions, where the objective was to use the lens of behavioral science, that is the science of understanding decision making, and apply that to the same decision making that we make when purchasing products online. As part of that, we ran a large multi-category study that included two main areas. Firstly, the observation of shopping journeys. We used screen and audio recordings to capture hundreds of hours of shoppers making those purchase decisions in as natural as an environment as possible, just at home. Then we painstakingly analysed this using the lens of behavioural science to understand the various decisions that people were making during those purchase journeys. And this helped us update our understanding of that decision-making behaviour and develop a model that we could then test and refine. Once we had that model, we then did another extensive bit of research using digital simulated purchase environments. And this is to validate if those behavioral science biases that we observed in the previous shopping journeys actually scaled to a large audience. We picked out a range of products that represent a varying degree of purchase decision complexity and enjoyment. For example, everything from buying a new car all the way to buying a new pair of jeans. Then we recruited 1,000 in-market shoppers for each of those products. And each shopper completed around 10 simulated purchase scenarios. And this allowed us to quantify the transfer of preference from one brand to another using different combinations of those 6 selected biases, the top biases that came out from our observations. We analysed the transfer of preferences between shoppers' favourite brand, their second favourite brand, and quite interestingly, a fake brand that we created just for simulation. The end result was that we were able to confirm this model in our thinking about this messy process of shopper exploration and evaluation that is constantly looping back and forth and is very fluid across various sources of information, both online and offline. Something far removed from the idea of kind of more simple purchase funnels that we may have been used to over the last few decades. More surprisingly, we found that shoppers would be prepared to pick a brand they've never heard of before if it showed up in a credible way. Over the last 12 months, as the amount of online shopping and research in most categories has accelerated rapidly, this work has become extremely helpful as a way to understand the shift to online, or to understand that the shift to online was having on driving brand substitutions. Except instead of it just being a completely fake brand, we just had brands that had lower levels of awareness or people necessarily hadn't shopped with before. And so during September 2020 last year, with this model in mind, we looked deeper into the home and garden category. When you dig into this data using search, you see that it's growing incredibly fast. Of course, we've mostly been at home for the last 12 months, so it makes sense that we're all trying to make that a more comfortable and enjoyable space to be. But what we really want to understand is, what does that mean for retailers in this category? And this is where we turn to Qual Research to answer the role of stores and the role of online platforms in the shopping journey. filling in the gap in our understanding of what was going on, certainly around inspiration. This is a category where shopping in physical stores has historically been a critical source of inspiration. But as in other categories, the role of stores has changed over 2020. And people are telling us that it's not just a short-term phenomenon. A third of people told us in August, interestingly, as lockdown restrictions in the UK were eased and stores were reopened or allowed to be opened, that they were actually thought they would be relying less on in-store exploration over the next 6 months, bringing us up to now. And they also told us where they thought they would increasingly look to for inspiration, which is of course online. And we can then see that sources like YouTube, interior design blogs, and other online platforms are going to become ever more central to that exploration of the home category. We asked similar questions about who they were shopping with. COVID-19 has pushed some shoppers to try new retailers, and many seem quite happy to keep shopping with these retailers well into 2021. And I think this points to almost this lasting ripple effect that COVID-19 restrictions and behaviour changes are going to have well into the future. Of course, some things will just be, relatively short behavioural changes that may go back to some way that they were previously back in 2019. But I think we're also going to see a lot of long-term changes that have either accelerated from where they would otherwise have been or are completely different to what we may have expected because of what we've gone through. Another example, and this one is a more nuanced hypothesis that we also used the course study to dig deeper into the motivations for. Last summer, we looked at the increasing rise for sustainable and ethical fashion, something that had been growing consistently over the last few years, but has only kind of continued further during 2020. This is a topic very much categorized by a say-do action gap. And what I mean by that is that shoppers, when asked, will overclaim how big of an impact sustainability has on their decision making when it comes to clothing. It's quite easy to see this when we look at sales data, for example. The fast fashion brands that are very accessible at a lower price point sell a lot more products than the likes of a Patagonia or an Allbirds, for example, that are very much focused on sustainability. And the reasons why consumers and participants do this is because it sounds like the right thing to say. It sounds like what we want to hear. And they want to make themselves look good. So here in this work, we wanted to go beyond just measuring that action gap, however interesting it is, to actually understanding the more nuanced view of the topic and what it meant for the wider category. Ultimately, when it came down to it, price, style, and availability are still key when we're buying clothing, of course. And while that was true, we actually managed to then uncover a more balanced picture of the indirect impact of sustainable fashion. And it was ultimately this halo effect that the presence of sustainable credentials has on shopper perceptions of that brand, of the product they're buying, and of actually just the value for money that they're getting from that product at whatever price point. And the very presence of these attributes, such as having natural materials or being manufactured locally, made us more confident in those purchase decisions. This was a bigger deal for younger shoppers, again, something we may expect. But it was across the board still significant. I think it'll be really interesting to kind of explore this behavior over time as our attitudes towards climate change and the need for action grow, over the next kind of few years or decades. So what does all this mean, and what's the impact on qual research for the last 12 months? Well, firstly, I hope you've seen how important qualitative research is to our understanding of the world. Even at a company like ours, where we have a depth of quantitative data points at our fingertips. From my point of view, there's a need, even more so now, to be really specific with our research, especially our qual research. This has been a big emphasis of ourselves over the last 12 months, especially when we've not been doing any in-person research for over a year now. We've found that distance qual research forces us to be much more focused. The results have shown that, unsurprisingly, this is a good behaviour to continue all the time, as so much of the value of our work is filling gaps in knowledge versus trying to do everything. So being precise with our scope really helps. We're living through an uncertain time with lots of potential long-term, or not, behavioural changes that we can explore and investigate. In the past, we've done lots of big one-off studies, research projects that give us a deep understanding of a single moment in time. But the last year has really shined a light on the importance of long-term data sets, especially qual. Incredibly valuable to trend behaviours and attitudes over time, enabling us to put findings into their proper context. Finally, and hopefully this isn't too sacrilege at an event like this, but we find that a balance that brings together, in our case, Google quant data analysis with primary qual research is needed to give a more complete picture of what's happening. Our quant work informs our qual work and vice versa. This relationship works really well for narrowing down specific hypotheses to test and focus on, to get those answers and to get valuable new data points. And ultimately, the kind of transformational insights that I'm sure we all seek to produce. And that, very briefly, is how we as kind of market researchers at Google go about searching for answers during a pandemic. Thank you for your time.